Hey kids. Okay, this is part 7, and where we left it last time, they had spent 2 years. So many people had died. Everybody was dying of death, of sickness, and it was horrible. But they just kept sending ship after ship after ship, telling them that they were going to spread the good news, but they actually knew while they were going, and that was to find gold. So remember Newport, he was the guy that was the captain. So in September, he went back to England with his ship full of all these rocks that he just knew was gold. And remember, they had brought over goldsmiths and men that knew rocks that would be able to tell them, oh, this is gold. Well, they had sent them over, filled the whole ship full of these rocks, and they get to England only to find out that it's fool's gold. It's not really gold. And so that was a big embarrassment to the Virginia Company. And, they hadn't come back with one single lump of gold. But Newport left again with 70 really happy people to leave and go to this wonderful promised land of Virginia, not knowing at all what they were going to. And they brought enough food supply to last the whole way there and maybe a week once they got there. Okay, there was 70 back at the shore and back in Jamestown, and now they're bringing 70 more with 1 week of supplies for them once they get there. Okay, well, and when Newport got there, the people are waiting for him to bring them supplies, shoes, tools, blankets, and he didn't bring anything. He didn't bring any of that, because if he had, then the people on the ship would know, oh, there must be a problem that we're having to bring them supplies. So he brought nothing for them. So by December, so that was in September of 1608 that he came back. By September, October, November, December, their food supply was down to critical. So remember, their way of getting food was to go to Powhatan and get him to help them or steal it from them. So he thought, okay, well, he blamed Powhatan for them starving. That was crazy, because remember, they wouldn't even farm. And Powhatan and his people, they farmed. But you have to have somebody to blame if you're the leader and you don't follow God, which was exactly how Smith was. Remember, John Smith is the one that's in charge. And by this time, well, no, not by this time. Let me keep going. Okay, so he blamed Powhatan for them starving, and he thought it was their obligation to feed them. So, of course, the week before, he had made a pact with Powhatan. We're going to be friends. We're going to treat each other good. We're not going to kill each other, and we're not going to fight anymore. So he goes to Powhatan, and he's planning to kidnap him, because he realizes, I've got to have food for my people. And so he is a big con artist. Remember that? So he tells him, I want to be your friends, but he's really plotted this way to actually take Powhatan and kidnap him and make his people give them money and supply, not money, but food, and in its place. But Powhatan had caught on to how slippery and how sly John Smith was, so he got away just in time. He snuck away, and then they had to fight his warriors. It is just divine providence that God that God led them to settle right there in Virginia. If they'd gone up north, they would have faced a totally different kind of Indian. The Seminoles were there, and they were ferocious. If they'd gone down south, they would have faced the Iroquois. So it's like God just put them there to have Powhatan, who was nicer than any Indian that they could have found, even though they were not nice to him. So it was strictly God's mercy. Okay, hold on. Okay, by April of 1609, it was planting time again, and the only survivor of the 8-man council was Smith. And even the pastor, remember, what was his name? Hunt, I think is his name. He had died. So they're left with, they had 279 bushels of corn. And so when they went to get them out of their supply barn, they had all been eaten with rats. So they had nothing to eat. They were down to nothing. So Jamestown, half of them went down to the oyster banks in the mouth of the river to live on shellfish. The other ones went up the river and they attempted to live on acorns and berries. And still other ones went to Point Comfort to fish, though they could never decide where to cast their net, so they never fished. I mean, these people just don't know how to work. And some of them, which I would have done, ran to Powhatan and just surrendered and said, "Can we work for you for food?" Those were the smart people. And then some just stole stuff from each other. So they had a funeral for Mr. Hunt. That was the reverend. So he was the only good and decent person left. But just when there's only 80 people left, and they are probably not going to live much longer, a ship arrives, and this man named Samuel Argall is the leader, the commander of the ship. And he kind of brought salvation for them. But back in England, the cover-up of how terrible this was going really bad. And too many people knew the truth because they had come back from here. And so they were trying to cover their lies. So the company needed somebody to blame it on, because everybody's looking for somebody to blame it on. So they blame it on John Smith. And they go, if it wasn't for him, it would have been a great success. But he was a terrible leader. And so they sent message back to him that they were liquidating the council and he no longer had his job. And they were going to replace him with a governor. And his name was Thomas Gates. And George Somers was going to be his admiral. So, once again, the Virginia Company sent all these people. They sent 9 ships, overcrowded with 500 people, including children and women. And this was the first time women and children came. But as their luck would have it, they end up in... I know y'all have heard of the Bermuda Triangle. Let's see, where's Bermuda? Okay, so here's Bermuda. So they came from England over here, and they're going over here to Virginia. And right in here are these little islands called Bermuda. Well, if you've heard anything about the Bermuda Triangle, you know it's a place where ships cannot make it. I mean, it's like the storms, and it just everything goes off. Their compasses go off. Everything's crazy in the Bermuda Triangle. And sure enough, they because of a hurricane, they end up right in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. So one ship went down. One of them turned back. So they stayed in this storm for 3 days. Finally, they had the water all in their ships. They couldn't pump the water out fast enough. But they found this island called Devil's Island, because they felt like hell had emptied all their devils, and they all ended up on this island. So there was a lot of superstition about this island, and they had to stay there for 9 months because their ship got caught between 2 coral reefs, and it was stuck, got wedged. That was one of the ships, and that was the one that Gates and Somers were on, that were going to come and be the leader and take Smith's place. Smith was on another boat. Okay, so, but they stayed there for 9 months, and the rest of them were supposed to meet in Bermuda, which was one of those islands in the Bermuda Triangle, but some of them just continued on to Virginia, and so they finally get to Jamestown, and where there had been 400, all right, they had like 400 people on their ship. They were all sick helpless, starving, and they come to a place that has no food. So they in the fall of 1609, they were so, they said that despair killed more of their people than the disease did, because they just lost hope. They got there thinking they were going to the promised land and everything, they were going to buildings and houses, and they were going to nothing. No food, no nothing. They assumed that their leaders had been lost at sea, so Smith refused to acknowledge that he was no longer in charge because there's no men to take his place. And he's mad that they're bringing somebody over there to take his place. So the company, all right, so Smith returns to England, and the company has got to save their reputation. So they decide they're going to publish a book called A True and Sincere Declaration. And they talk about how, the Christian faith, they went over there to give the Christian faith to these demonic people, the Indians, and how many of, they just spin it like they are doing a ministry for God, which they are not doing that at all. So John Smith, and there's people in England that have been to Virginia and they know the truth. And John Smith decides he's going to write his own book. And so he writes his book called The Description of Virginia. They're so creative in their books. And this is what he quoted. "We did admire how it was possible such wise men," talking about the Virginia Company, "could so torment themselves and us with strange absurdities and impossibilities, like saving the Indians, making religion their color." So they were making that the reason why you went, when all their aim was nothing but present profit, as most plainly appeared by sending us so many refiners, goldsmiths, jewelers, lapidaries, and stonecutters, so doting on the mines of gold in the South Sea that all the world could not have devised better courses to bring us to ruin than they did themselves. So he's blaming it all on the company, saying, okay, they bought you with religion, but their real goal was just to get gold. So within 2 years, the company had reduced to raising funds by public lottery and direct mail campaign to mayors in rural towns that had no idea and weren't up on the news of what was really going on. So back in Jamestown, it was the fall of 1609. And all these people that had dispersed and gone to dig clams and do all those, they straggled back into Jamestown because it is fixing to be winter and they have they need some shelter. So the mosquitoes were so bad that, so many died from malaria and other things that mosquitoes carry. And then it was very damp and the weather was bad and the winter was really, really bad. So many people died. And there was no pastor to bury them or lead them to the Lord at the last minute. It was just a really, really bad time for Virginia colony. They called it the starving time, as if the other times hadn't been the starving time, but this was the worst. They ate the hogs, the sheep, goats, and a few horses that had come over in the last ships, every bit of their hides and themselves. They started eating dogs and cats and rats and field mice and little snakes, and they dug up the roots of the trees and the bushes and they gnawed on them, and every bit of shoe leather on their shoes, and they would boil it, and every strap of leather, even book covers that were made out of leather, they would boil them and eat them. Some of them froze to death in their beds, and there was just no helping them. So finally in May of 1610, deliverance came, and it actually came in the form of a boat called Deliverance, and one of them named Patience. The people that had ended up on the Bermuda island in the Bermuda Triangle, and their ship had lodged between the two coral reefs. Well, they took apart that ship and built these two smaller ships. And so they arrive, and okay, these are the leaders, you know. So they walk up to, you know, 60 people are left of the 400 that they had brought over, and the 80 passenger sailors that were there at the plantation. They are reduced from 480 to just 60 people, and they look like sticks standing on the shores. And, you know, Summers and Gates were horrified. These are gentlemen. These are people, commanders of wars. They're not used to seeing that. And they decided to abandon Jamestown immediately and go for home. But then they realized that they didn't have enough provision to make it home. And so right when they're trying to decide what to do, a ship comes, and this guy named Lord de la Warr is on the ship, and he has come from England, and because he heard that the governors had been lost at sea, so he is coming to be the governor. And he is in charge now, and he marches everybody back to the thing, because he is going to rule. He is the governor, so he's going to make them make Jamestown work. He lasted, but he did bring a chaplain, Richard Buck, and so once again the Jamestown is saved, I guess, for a little bit longer. And how interesting that one of the boats is called Patience. So he lasted for about a year. But here's the description of the people that came. They were convicts. They were down on their luck gentlemen. They were professional soldiers that didn't have a war, and they were the slum orphans of London. So London was full of these, what they called street urchins, which were just children without parents that had that stole, like David Copperfield. And they brought them over, and these are the chosen people that God is using to maintain America. Okay, so De La Warr, he endured a year and went home. He just thought, okay, and all the gentlemen that came with him, they were not, they got tired of colonizing England and being, you know, the leaders, because this was hard. They weren't expecting this to be so hard. So they left it in the hands of Sir Thomas Dale. Now, he was a martial discipline. He was a true disciplinarian. And he is now has the office of making them do whatever he wants them to do. Well, he was a very godly man, so he made them go to worship services twice a day. And if you missed 3, then you got hung. So it was like, we're going to get you to heaven one way or the other. And conditions started slowly improving. But then something happened that only God could be in the midst of it. They decided to kidnap Pocahontas. And by this time, Pocahontas is 18 years old, and she's beautiful. So they kidnapped her for ransom. And Pocahontas paid bushels of corn, but when he didn't release his daughter, they demanded more corn. It's just like they were starving. They had to get as much as they could out of this thing. Meanwhile, Dale, the guy that was in charge, he had taken a special interest in her soul, winning her to the Lord. But then John Rolfe had fallen in love with her. And he just was hopelessly in love with her. And apparently she was in love with him. So Powhatan and Dale are going to meet, and they brought their war parties, and it looks like it's going to be a war. And then John Rolfe rides up with his letter saying, please ask Powhatan if I can have Pocahontas as my bride. I mean, it is like a love story. And so instead of proclaiming war, they had a wedding, and which, you know, only God could do that. And it was the first wedding between a white and an Indian, and both sides were completely pleased. They thought it was a great idea, because now they've got a reason to get food from them and take care of each other and to be friends. So they gave her the name of Rebecca. Her Christian name is Rebecca, and he took her back to England to show her off, and she was great. Um, a great commercial for the Virginia Company, because look, you can go and get this beautiful bride from the Indians. So anyway, she was the belle of the London society. They dressed her up, they took her to parties. She loved it. She loved England and London and wanted to stay. She fit right in, apparently, but she had to go back, and because the company said she was the only way they could have peace with the Indians back home. So they sent her back. And sadly, she got sick on the way home and died. So, but Rolfe went back, grief-stricken, and he had figured out that this would be great land to harvest tobacco. And amazing that something so addictive and so bad would end up being their salvation. But he literally went back and he divided the land up. They divided the land up into 100 acres of family, and they put plantations on each one of these lands, and they gave them the seed and everything and said, grow tobacco. And this was the very first cash crop of America. Okay, I'm going to stop right here because I realize it's been 21 and a half minutes and I don't want to bore you to death. But so the next chapter is called To the Promised Land. So that should be good news, because finally we got some good news going on. So anyway, y'all have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening. Bye.